As I told you, the game I'm playing in this is gonna be sporadic. So let's continue.
Chapter 11, Quirk Assessment. Hoo. Long chapter. The time for UA came quicker than Izuku ever realized it would. It was weird how time could feel like it was crawling by at one point only to shoot past the next. News about his acceptance into UA had spread faster than the common cold. Izuku would never forget the day he answered a knock at the door to see the old woman from the convenience store. She had a bright smile on her face and held out a tin full of brownies for him to take. Their talk was short as she had someone watching over the store, but she made sure to praise his efforts on cleaning the beach as well as getting into UA. "You'll do great things, child. I just know it." Her friendly face melted into something serious. "You keep your head up high and always do the right thing. Regardless of if it's the easy thing." "Oh. Yes ma'am. I promise. Thank you for the brownies. And the use of your dumpster," Izuku said, bowing gratefully only to feel a tap on his head. "Enough of that, young man. Just do as I said and succeed. I hope to see you on the news before I die." Izuku's mom chose that time to come around the corner and there was a brief moment where she stumbled over her words. She offered the old woman some tea, but the old woman seemed determined on leaving. Izuku watched her hobble down the hallway before slowly shutting the door. But now, it was time for UA. Izuku was sad to hear that he would be in a separate class to Shinsu, but the difference between 1A and 1B couldn't have been that drastic, right? They both considered themselves lucky that Shinsu had gathered just enough points to earn a spot in the hero course curriculum. Even if that meant he had to take extra classes for the time being to raise his grade higher. This was his thought on his first official day of UA. He made sure to hug his mother as she wished him luck on his first day and headed out the door. His UA uniform was crisp and clean and perfectly fitted for his height. He was amazed when the doctor told him he was now 5'8" with still room to grow. Izuku had hardly noticed his growth over the summer, only noting that he was almost as tall as Shinsu. His red tie was expertly tied and tightened on his neck. Nana had almost laughed at his first attempt at tying but sobered up as he explained his lack of a father to teach him. She had stood him in front of the mirror and said, "You don't need a father to teach you to tie a tie," with more determination than Izuku had ever heard from her before. Nana seemed very serious as she guided him through each step of the process until he was able to do it himself seamlessly. "See? Who needs a father when you have a ghost?" That startled a snorting laugh out of Izuku which made Nana join in, wrapping him in warmth. The walk to UA was much the same as before, but this time, Izuku had hoped to get there early so as to talk to Shinsu before class started. But the other boy didn't seem to be answering his texts on where to meet. Figuring they could meet up after class instead, Izuku continued on to find his actual classroom. "Up ahead on the right side, Izuku," Nana said helpfully, which Izuku thanked her for. He was amazed at just how large the door is, but he figured in a school where the motto was plus ultra it was to be expected. Izuku knew he was likely to be the first student to arrive, so he had no issue with pulling the door open and stepping inside. However, to his horror, he wasn't the first kid. In fact, it looked like he was one of the last to show up. And it was just in time to see the navy-haired boy scolding Bakugo for putting his shoes up on the desk. "Oh great. Both of them are here." Nana huffed. "Just my luck." Izuku sighed as he watched the encounter unfold from the door. The taller boy seemed to try to introduce himself, but he didn't know how callous Kaken could be. In fact, he even seemed amazed at the idea of Bakugo threatening him. Boy, did he have a lot to learn about being in a class with the exploding blonde. All at once, however, all eyes turned to him at the door. "It's you." The navy-haired boy gasped. Hi." Izuku said awkwardly as he waved a shaking hand. "Good morning." The navy-haired boy said, marching over. "My name is Itsutinya. I'm from the dash. From Sami, right. Izuku interrupted. I'm Midoriya Izuku. His nerves wanted him to back away as memories from both exams came flooding at him. Well, Midoriya, allow me to formally apologize, Itza said, bowing at the waist in front of Izuku. I misjudged you before the exams and I now know my actions could have been seen as harassment. I want you to know that I in no way meant to alarm you or to call attention to you in a demeaning fashion. But do not take that to mean I am excusing my actions. Really, it's fine. Izuku interrupted once more, shaking his head. It's in the past now, right? No hard feelings. You are entirely too forgiving. Nana huffed. Itza stood up from his bow with a stoic look on his face before nodding. Thank you, but I must tell you. Izuku tilted his head curiously as Itza seemed to gather his composure. You realized there was something more to the practical exam, didn't you? You must be very perceptive. As I stated previously, I completely misjudged you. You are far superior to me as a student. I doubt that very seriously. But truthfully, I had no idea there was anything going on during the exams. I was just as frantic as everyone else to destroy the robots before time ran out. Izuku explained, rubbing the back of his neck nervously. This seemed to throw Itza off as he looked at Izuku with wide eyes. But, you got the highest amount of points. Are you saying you did that out of luck? He said, amazed. Well, no way, this is that guy. Someone with red spiked hair said as he jumped out of his seat. I heard about you. They say you took down the 0-pointer all by yourself. That's so manly. He said, nearly shaking in excitement. As if, not with a weak quirk like his. Bakugo sneered at his own desk, arms crossed tightly. The red-haired boy did a double take. Wah, weak quirk. He ripped a slab of concrete by himself. He stopped the robot in its tracks. He saved Izuku was quick to try to put a lid on the situation before it got explosive. Waving his hands quickly, he spoke. All that was luck. And most of that wasn't even my quirk. Really, it's not that big of a deal. Hey, I recognized that hair. It's you, Midoriya. Uraraka cheered from behind him. Izuku flinched hard and turned quickly just in time to see Uraraka's smiling face. I never did get to thank you for saving me at the practical exams. Oh, it's nothing, really. I should be thanking you for trying to go in and give me some of your points. But it looks like we both made it in on our own. Izuku laughed slightly, happy to have the conversation off of the entrance exams. Shinsu's worried face was still etched in his mind and he wasn't too keen on the questions he knew could come up. Wait, how did you know about that? Luckily it seemed like she wasn't looking for an answer as she shook her head. Well, anyway, what do you think we're doing today besides orientation? I can't wait to meet everyone. That was when their chat was cut off by a voice behind them. If you're just here to make friends, then you can pack up your stuff now. The entire room of eyes jerked down to the floor behind Uraraka, where a sleeping bag laid containing an raven-haired man. Welcome to UA's hero course. Izuku listened as they were berated for taking 8 seconds to quiet down. Wow. What a prude. I've never met this guy before. Nana said, which wasn't too helpful as Izuku tried to keep a straight face. My name is Izawa Shouta. I'm your teacher. Now, he reached into the confines of his sleeping bag and pulled out a blue and white uniform. Put these on and head outside. We're skipping orientation and going straight into the first test of your high school careers. What? The entire class shouted in unison. Underscore. Later on, after they were all dressed and waiting for instructions, Izuku heard whispers behind him between Uraraka and a wide-eyed green-haired girl with some kind of mutation quirk. We're really missing orientation for a test? Can he do that? Uraraka whispered, but it appeared that wasn't good enough as Mr. Izawa cleared his throat. You'll find that the curriculum at UA is vastly different from everything you've ever experienced. This is a hero school and you are all aspiring heroes. Which basically means I have the leeway to run my class however I see fit. He spoke loudly and clearly with the scowl never leaving his face. If you have a problem with that, then feel free to stop wasting my time and leave now. There was an awkward pause as he seemed to wait for people to decide to leave, but when it was clear that wasn't going to happen, he nodded. Very well then. We won't waste time with a syllabus or orientation today. Instead, there will be a series of 8 tests. You will find that they are similar to physical tests you've taken in junior high. Only this time, you are allowed to use your quirks however you see fit. There was an immediate outburst of whispers and chatter, but it was silenced with a harsh glare from Mr. Aizawa. The country is still trying to pretend we are all created equal by not letting those with the most power excel. It isn't rational. His eyes raked over the group in front of him until they landed on Bakugo. Bakugo, you have a pretty versatile quirk, and yet you still only ranked number 2 in the practical exams. What was your farthest distance throwing a softball in junior high? Bakugo in turn growled under his breath. 67 meters. I think. Well, now you're gonna do it using your quirk. This time, try using your quirk for something other than pointless destruction. Aizawa lectured, tossing a ball at Bakugo, who caught it effortlessly. Step into the circle. If you destroy the ball you get a score of 0. You can't leave the circle. But besides that, you have free rein. Now throw it. All right? You asked for it? Bakugo growled as he winded up his pitch and threw with all the force he could. Izuku watched in slow motion as the ball left his hand completely, but then Bakugo suddenly let out a blast, propelling the ball into the air with rings of smoke. Take that. Aizawa didn't seem impressed as he turned towards the rest of the class and held up device portraying Bakugo's score of 705.2 meters. All of you need to know your maximum capabilities. You figure out your capabilities and you can see your potential as a pro hero. 705 meters, are you kidding me? A blonde boy observed from the back. I wanna go. A pink-skinned girl said excitedly. That looks like fun. You should really learn your classmates' names, Izuku. Nana teased. What is up with you today? Izuku asked in his head as he tried not to roll his eyes. You're a lot more snarky than usual. It's the first time I've been in UA in decades. Can you really blame me? I think the teenage hormones are getting to me. Nana snickered and Izuku really did roll his eyes that time. This seemed to be the wrong thing to do at that moment as Mr. Aizawa's bloodshot eyes locked onto him and scowled. Is this boring you, Midoriya? Eee. No, sir. Not at all. Izuku shook his head quickly. But Mr. Aizawa went on talking as if he hadn't said anything. If that isn't enough to keep you interested, how's this? Today you'll compete in these 8 physical tests to gauge your potential. Whoever comes in last clearly has none and will be immediately expelled from the UA Hero course, and another student can take your place. Aizawa smirked at the teens as they stuttered to comprehend what he just said. And if you're wondering, I can, in fact, do that. As I said, UA is a hero school. The best of the best. We do not have time to waste on those with no potential. Immediate expulsion? That seems pretty harsh. Izuku felt ice in his veins as he thought about the other students in the class. He had seen some of their quirks in action and there was no doubt that some of them were stronger than him. It meant that he really had the potential to be the one sent home. If the tests weren't suited for him to use his quirk, he wouldn't stand a chance. Now I seem to have your full attention. Good. If you want to be a pro, you're going to have to push yourself to the brink. The next 3 years will be filled with one trial after the next and only the best of the best will come out on top. So as the UA motto goes, go beyond plus ultra. Prove that you deserve to be here. For all his abrasiveness, he did have a point. UA was the best for a reason. All Might graduated from here and so did Nana. Things may have changed but only to facilitate the ever-growing demand for heroes. UA wouldn't be the best if it stuck to by-the-book methods of teaching. This in mind, Izuku felt determination fill his body. He could do this. He could become a hero just like Nana. Heck yeah, kiddo. You've got this. _____. First test, 50-meter dash. Izuku watched the green-haired girl from before and Itza line up at the starting line together. It was clear who the winner would be even without the timer. Itza was in his element on speed, but the girl wasn't just competing against him, she was competing against the whole class. She received a score of 5.58 seconds, which was pretty fast in comparison to Izuku's junior high time. Izuku figured if he could keep his own time between 4 and 5 seconds, he'd be on track to at least not end up last. Midoriya, you're up next. Uraraka as well. Take your positions. Aizawa announced, which made Izuku's heart stop momentarily. He had to go already? Your quirks are pretty similar based off your files. So this should be interesting to see who makes it out on top. Especially since there is no helping each other allowed. Izuku watched as Uraraka started to activate her quirk on herself and her shoes. Which meant they would be pretty evenly matched. It was only a matter of whose quirk lowered their gravitational field the most, and who was faster. Izuku had trained for months in running, but that didn't mean he was a shoo-in. He had endurance, but that meant nothing when it came to a sprint. And like before, he wasn't just competing with Uraraka. He was competing with the entire class. Stop psyching yourself out. You can do this. Nana encouraged him and Izuku nodded as he took his starting position. Good luck, Midoriya. Uraraka said, smiling as she got in her position as well. You too, Izuku muttered. On your mark. Get set. As soon as Izuku heard the bang go off, he lunged out, activating his quirk mid-stride. Immediately, he pulled ahead. His strides were longer now as he was essentially floating forward and pushing himself along at a rapid pace. He didn't even look behind him as he had only the finish line in his sights. It felt like forever before his foot finally touched that white line and the machine beeped. 4.78 seconds. The machine spoke and Izuku smiled as he felt Nana pat his back. You did great. You were practically a blur out there. Whatever Izuku was going to reply with was stopped as Uraraka ran up to him. Wow, Midoriya. You were really flying out there. Good job. She said, holding a hand up for a high five. Izuku smacked it on instinct and smiled back. You too. It was a good idea to use your quirk on your shoes. Every little bit helps. Alright, you two. Clear the track. Make room for the next two. Aizawa called out, causing the two students to run back to the other students waiting to take their tests as well. Second test, grip strength. Izuku held onto his device knowing he could get an average score by using his own strength. But that would put him lower on the list. He needed to use Nana's hold as well. The only issue was, he didn't know where to get the energy. They were outside. Far from any electric appliances aside from the devices used to track their quirks. And that wouldn't work for what Izuku needed. Izuku, look at that boy over there. Nana urged and Izuku followed her touch to turn and see the blonde boy from earlier standing off to the side. He was looking down at his own device and was holding an electrical charge on his other finger. It was small but he inched it towards the device slowly as if to short it out. Is he cheating? Izuku asked himself as he walked over slowly. I don't know, but I think he would be a good conductor of power. Izuku accidentally snuck up on the boy, judging by the way he flinched. I wasn't cheating. Wadash. It's just me. Izuku said amicably as he raised his hands. I saw you were having trouble figuring out how to use your quirk to help you with the test. Izuku tried to put on his most friendly look. I'm no UA teacher, but studying quirks is a hobby of mine. I could help you out if you like. The boy looked at Izuku suspiciously. What's in it for you? Izuku ducked his head. Well, maybe later on you can tell me more about how your quirk works. I've never seen a hero with an electricity quirk before. It looks pretty awesome. Izuku wasn't lying in the slightest, yet he still felt a little bad about what he was about to do. What did you have in mind? The boy asked, now curious. It took a moment for Izuku to decide, but he was fairly sure his plan would work. Well, you charge your body with electricity, right? Maybe you could trigger an adrenaline rush? People have more strength than they realize, and adrenaline can help. The boy seemed to consider it. That actually could work. I think I've read an article about something like that happening actually. I'll give it a try. Thanks. I'm Kaminari, by the way. Izuku shared his name and a smile with the boy as he nodded and walked off. Now all he had to do was wait. Be ready, Nana, he muttered. She was. For when Kaminari charged up his body, she was right there, and Izuku immediately felt the rush of warmth signifying his power up. Squeezing the device as hard as he could, Izuku felt the warmth fade away. He looked at Kaminari as he shivered harshly, as everyone seemed to do when in contact with Nana, but luckily the boy seemed to pass it off as part of his quirk and tried again. Looking down at his device, Izuku was happy to see a score of 150 kilograms. If he was correct, that gave him one of the highest scores in the match. He reported it to Izawa proudly, unaware of the man's suspicious stare as he marked it down. Third test, standing long jump. Izuku needed no fancy gimmick on this test. He was third up but before Eureka. He hoped she followed in his footsteps as he activated his quirk mid-jump, allowing himself to continue floating past the testing area. Izawa rolled his eyes but marked down the max score for him. His smile was open and happy as he heard his fellow students praise his skill and quirk. Was this how Bakugo felt? Izuku had to admit, it felt nice to be appreciated. Speaking of Bakugo, Izuku was eager to see his score was the same as Izuku, seeing as how they both floated using their separate quirks. Good job, Kaken. Izuku called out as the spiky redhead ran over to Bakugo. He only received a glare in return as Bakugo turned his attention to the redhead. It didn't matter though, Izuku's mood couldn't have been deterred. ____. Fifth test, ball throw. Izuku figured his position in class was almost guaranteed, so he laid off on the repeated sidestep test. He didn't want to overuse his quirk too much and risk making himself sick. Among the other students who weren't using their quirk for that part either, he ranked fairly well. He knew that the rest of the tests would be similar, with the only other test he needed his quirk on being the distance run, but it was getting pretty clear to everyone that they were less and less able to rely on their quirks as the test focused more on physical fitness than skill. But now it was time for the ball throw. This one, Izuku was nervous about. He couldn't really trick Kaminari into charging his quirk for him, seeing as how they were going one at a time. So that meant he had to rely on his levitation quirk. Nana's encouragement in his ear, Izuku stepped into the circle and grabbed the ball. He took a deep breath as he calmed his stomach. He knew what he needed to do. He couldn't throw very far on the ground, but if he gave himself some air, he could throw the ball farther than the students who couldn't use their quirk on the test. Students like the Creation Girl would surpass him, but he would still get a fairly average score. This in mind, Izuku reaching inside himself and tried activating his quirk. Now, Izuku knew what his levitation quirk felt like. And he also knew what his spirit quirk felt like. So there was no reason he should have felt such a blinding heat inside himself so suddenly when trying to use his quirk. Immediately, he fell to his knees, feeling like he was standing on the surface of the sun. Nana, what's happening? He called out in his head only to receive silence. Nana. The heat seemed to be too much as Izuku cried out. He could feel the sweat pouring from his forehead as arms started to move him onto his back. Whoa, what's wrong with him? He's sweating like a pig. But he's not even hot. Just as suddenly, the heat vanished and was replaced with the chill he had come to expect regularly. Izuku. Izuku, can you hear me? I'm here, sweetie, I'm here. Geez, he's freezing now. What, dash. All of you get back. The voices rushed past Izuku and he realized he had closed his eyes at some point. Opening them, he saw the worried faces of Uraraka, Itza, and the less noticeable, but still their face of Mr. Aizawa all leaning over him. Midoriya, can you hear me? This time the phrase came from Mr. Aizawa and Izuku nodded slowly. The teacher sighed in relief. Can you sit up? Again, Izuku nodded and felt several pairs of hands helping him to sit up. What happened? He asked, looking around to see the entire class standing around him. I don't know. You just collapsed. Uraraka shrugged nervously with Itza nodding beside her. Aizawa seemed to think it was a good time to chime in. Everyone, take a 10-minute break while I handle this. He ordered. Now. He said, a little more forceful when nobody seemed to want to listen. That triggered movement as everyone reluctantly dispersed, leaving Aizawa and Izuku kneeling in the circle of the ball throw. Sir? Did I do something wrong? He's Eraserhead, Izuku. He took you quirk. I couldn't reach you. Nana said suddenly as Izuku felt warmth all around him. Nana was holding him. Or at least trying to. Izuku could hear the tears in her voice and he was honestly very confused. Mr. Aizawa ducked his head before shaking it. No. You didn't do anything. Here, let's get you on the bench and I'll explain. Izuku was helped up by Aizawa with more care than he thought the man had. Can you walk fine? Again, Izuku nodded. Even so, Izuku felt Aizawa's hand on his shoulder ready to catch him should he fall. They were both silent as they made their way to a bench. While Izuku sat down, Aizawa stayed standing in front of him. I erased your quirk, Aizawa explained, which Izuku already knew from Nana, but it was nice to hear again. Your Eraserhead. Izuku said, rubbing the dried sweat from his forehead. But why would you take my quirk away? Because he's an inconsiderate asshole who should never be around children, let alone in a school. Nana's retort came with a rage Izuku had never heard before and it surprised him. I'm sorry, Izuku. I'm just upset. I couldn't reach you anymore and I was worried when you collapsed. Izuku wrapped his arms around his middle, almost like returning the hug Nana was currently giving him, but it didn't have the same effect, he knew. Aizawa sighed as he looked Izuku over. I was going to make a point about you overusing your quirk. I've read through your file and it doesn't match with the strengths you displayed today. Whether that means you were wrong about your quirk, or something else entirely is yet to be determined, but I promise you that I didn't know you would react that way to your quirk being taken. It was as close to an apology as Izuku knew he was going to get, so he nodded. My resting body temperature is 32 degrees. It was a shock to both Izuku and his mother when the doctor told them, but apparently it was fine as long as Izuku didn't show any adverse symptoms. Ah. So when your quirk was taken, your body went from that to a normal temperature and it was like you were running a fever. Mr. Aizawa seemed to understand. As I said, I didn't know that would happen and I understand if you would like to speak to the principal about what happened today. He better hope he can still get a job on the same continent as you after this. Despite Nana's anger, Izuku shook his head. It's fine. Mistakes happen. I'm fine. What? Izuku, no, that's dash. Aizawa seemed surprised at his response before his usual calm mask slipped into place. Fine, you're excused from the ball throwing portion of the test. I'll give you an average score as a placeholder if you feel like you want to try again after the rest of your class goes. And you're sure you're alright? You don't need to see Recover Girl. Izuku shook his head and mustered up a small smile. I'm fine, Mr. Aizawa. The teacher left him to it then as he walked off to instruct the rest of the students as they filed in. Izuku, how could you just let him off like that? Nana demanded, affronted even as Izuku felt her brush against his cheek. He didn't mean for it to happen, Nana. It was an accident. Izuku sighed, stretching his arms out. If he really wanted to hurt me he would have waited until I was in the air and let me fall. But he's a teacher. He was just trying to teach me a lesson about overusing my quirk. But you weren't going to. Izuku let the dots connect in his mind in favor of speaking instead. He maybe wasn't going to overuse his quirk then, but he had overused his quirk twice before. Both around Shinsu. Are you saying Mr. Aizawa was one of Shinsu's foster dads? It made sense. He was a teacher at UA. Shinsu's sudden inspiration about his hero costume. All of it fell together. So it would make sense that Aizawa would want to make a statement to Izuku about overusing his quirk. He had scared Shinsu twice already with it. Even if Aizawa didn't know the specifics of the entrance exam, Izuku knew Shinsu was pretty shaken. See, Nana. He's just a dad worried about his own kid. Doesn't mean I have to like him. Izuku was saved from having to respond as Itza and Yurika walked over to his spot on the bench. Yurika smiled as she handed over a cold water bottle. Hey, Midoriya. You're looking a lot better. Do you mind sharing what happened back there? Itza asked, worry and curiosity in his eyes. With a shrug of his shoulders, Izuku tried to seem as nonchalant as possible. Mr. Aizawa accidentally triggered a quirk malfunction. But I'm fine. I'm just resting for now. I'll be back out there in a bit. Are you sure that's wise? Itza's concern was strong, but Izuku had plenty of practice convincing others of his well-being. Really, I'm okay. Thanks for the water. Izuku took a sip of the cold water with a smile, even standing with little issue. This seemed to soothe their worries enough for them to back off. For that, Izuku was grateful. Walking back over to the ball throw, Izuku had to reassure a couple of other students that he was fine before he was left undisturbed. Taking the opportunity, he sat and watched as everyone else took the ball throwing test. He paused, making mental notes on occasion about their quirks and potential uses, but mostly he basked in the fact that he was still there. After everything, he was still standing. Still smiling. Just like a hero. Discord link. http URL. Chapter 12, First Day Part 2. Short chapter this time. Mostly a transitional one. Izuku stepped forward as soon as the last student was done with their ball throw. Mr. Aizawa, I'd like to try to ball throw again. The entire class jaws dropped as they gawked at him. Are you serious? You just ate shit less than 30 minutes ago, you damn nerd. Are you trying to kill yourself? Do you think you have something to prove? Bakugo spat, as he stomped over towards Izuku. His hand was smoking as he went to grab Izuku's shoulder, but he was intercepted by Aizawa's capture weapon wrapping around his shoulder. I don't think that's any of your business, Bakugo. And using quirks on other students is forbidden under UA's rules. Are you trying to get expelled today? Aizawa sneered as he pulled the boy back into line. Take a lap and get it out of your system before you hurt someone. Bakugo luckily seemed to have the good sense to keep his mouth shut. Instead, he stomped away, actually starting a lap around the large track. His fists clenched by his sides sparked but never fully exploded as he went. Almost immediately, the redhead boy followed after him. At once, the class's attention turned back to Izuku, who was shifting nervously under their gaze. If you feel up to it, go ahead. But don't push yourself too hard. Aizawa warned as he handed the ball over. Izuku had no idea where it came from, but he couldn't help but retort, "Weren't you the one who said we had to push ourselves to the brink if we wanted to succeed?" It was rude, and by the gasps of his classmates behind him, they knew it too. There was a deathly quiet moment as Izuku waited for Aizawa to send him to the principal for disrespect, but suddenly the teacher just smirked. "That I did, well, go on then. We don't have all day." The surprises weren't stopping, it seemed. Izuku stepped into the circle, feeling Nana's soothing touch down his arm. "Take it easy on this one, sweetie. You don't want to overdo it?" Rather than nodding, Izuku took a large steadying breath and activated his quirk. His levitation took him about 2 meters off the ground before Izuku felt his stomach tense slightly. He was quick then, winding his arm back and chunking the ball ahead with as much force as he could muster. As soon as it left his hand, he floated back down to the ground so as not to make himself sick. The ball bounced to a stop in the distance and Izuku turned to Aizawa for his score. Not bad," the man said, turning the device around so Izuku could see that it said 137.2 meters. More than enough to beat the times of the students who couldn't use their quirks to help them. And not bad from Aizawa had to have been some kind of compliment. Izuku knew that was rare. It made Izuku feel a lot better. _____. The rest of the tests were unremarkably standard. Which meant everyone was buzzing with excitement to see the final scoreboard. Aizawa smirked as he held his phone up to project the results. 1 Yaoyorozu Momo. 2 Todoroki Shouto. 3 Bakugo Katsuki. 4 Midoriya Izuku. 5 Itza Tinya. 6 Tokoyami Fumikage. 7 Shoji Mizo. 8 Ajiro Mashirao. 9 Urarika Okako. 10 Kiris Hima Ajiro. Admittedly, Izuku tuned out after that. He was satisfied with knowing he was in the top 10 and not last. "See? I knew you could do it." Nana cheered for him, causing Izuku to smile brightly. "And you will all be relieved to know that I lied about expelling the last person. It was a tactical ruse to push you to do your best," Aizawa said nonchalantly as he slipped the device into his pocket. "Oh right." Izuku felt guilty as he thought about how he hadn't even looked at last place. He was just relieved it wasn't him. Eyes scanning over the group, he found the student with the most relief who appeared to be the shortest one. From what Izuku observed during the test, he had orbs on his head that he could detach and stick to anything except himself. A neat quirk but not very useful in the tests besides the side steps. "Why, you mean I'm not going home?" the boy shouted and Izuku flinched. Aizawa sighed. "I don't like repeating myself, you know. Now, head to the showers and get cleaned up." Izuku followed along with the rest of his classmates as they went into the showers and split up. He was the last one in, which meant he got the shower closest to the door, but that didn't really matter to him. Everyone seemed pretty intent on minding their own business, so he stripped out of his gym uniform quickly. The quirk malfunction left him feeling gross and sticky the rest of the class, and he was finally glad to wash it all off. It seemed it was true for all of them, as the locker room was mostly silent except for the running water. It was as they were all getting dressed that chatter started commencing once more. Izuku wasn't really interested in participating in it as he focused on tying his tie like Nana showed him and contemplating his next move. He needed to talk to Aizawa alone. "Does that mean you're gonna?" "Yeah," Izuku was going to explain his quirk. "Are you sure that's wise? I know he may be Shinsu's foster parent, but does that really make him trustworthy with something like this? He's my teacher. I can't hope to improve my quirk without him knowing its full capabilities." Izuku moved on to tying his shoes, perhaps slower than usual as the class started to file out. "That isn't the whole reason, is it?" Nana knew him too well. Izuku sighed. "No, it isn't. If he took the news about my quirk well, or even just believed me, I'd probe him to get his opinion on quirk transferring. Or at least I'll try to. Don't worry though. I won't tell him about All Might or One for All. That's not what I'm worried about. But Nana didn't elaborate on what she meant, and before Izuku could ask, he felt a hand on his shoulder. Jerking his head over, Izuku saw Itza standing beside him looking very worried. Midoriya, I seriously think you should go see Recovery Girl. You've been staring at your untied shoes for 3 minutes now. He explained. You've been off since you had that quirk malfunction. Izuku blinked in surprise at Itza paying such close attention to him. He was so used to being ignored or sinking into the background that it was odd hearing someone have concern for him that wasn't Nana or his mother or Shinsu. Oh, I'll be fine. I'm just thinking about some stuff. Izuku bent down, quickly tying both shoes before standing back up. You say you're fine, but your actions say different. Itza just wasn't letting it go. Well, I'm planning on talking to Mr. Aizawa after class today anyway. If he thinks I need to see Recovery Girl, I will. I promise. Izuku said, smiling reassuringly at Itza, hoping it was enough to ease his worries. Luckily, it was, as Itza relaxed, probably having complete faith in Mr. Aizawa's abilities to see through Izuku's ruse. All right. We better get going before he comes looking for us. Right, Izuku said as they both headed out, bags thrown over their shoulder. Izuku started running. Why? He needs to lighten up a bit. No kid needs to be so serious. Come on, have a little fun. Nana urged, tapping Izuku on the shoulder quickly. With an eye roll, Izuku took off ahead. Midoriya. What are you dash? Race you back to class. Izuku shouted back as he ran down the sidewalk to the building. He could hear Itza's fast strides behind him and just knew the other boy's longer legs would aid him in beating Izuku even without his quirk. He really didn't care about winning though. Nana was right, it was unexpectedly fun. Izuku watched as Itza passed him up before stopping right at the entrance back into the building. Their smiles were happy as the pair caught up and Itza opened the door. We shouldn't run in the halls of UA, but thank you for the challenge. I realize I should work on my stamina for running without my quirk in case it was ever nullified in Bat Dash. It was just supposed to be fun, Itza, Izuku informed him as they walked down the hall. Fun? Itza said curiously. I can have fun. The way he spoke was defensive, as if someone had told him before he was incapable of having fun. Izuku assumed they had. Itza clearly had a complicated personality and it could easily be misunderstood. Their interactions during the exams were proof of that. Good. Izuku agreed as they made it to the classroom. About time you two showed up. I was just about to pass out the syllabus. Aizawa noted indifferently as the two students moved to their desks. My apologies, sir. We were just dash. It's fine. Here, pass these out for me. Aizawa held out a stack of papers that Izuku assumed to be the syllabus and Itza's face lit up. Yes, sir. Itza was a complex student all right, but Izuku felt that it would be nice to get to know him. See? You need more friends, honey. I know. Discord link. HTTP URL.
Oh, that was already fast. Yeah, that was a short chapter. Okay, wow, that was a short chapter.
Chapter 13, Misunderstanding. The end of class came sooner than Izuku realized, as Aizawa almost mechanically went over things like grading policies and student conduct. The bottom line seemed to be that no cheating or violence or bullying would be tolerated. Which was common sense, so Izuku felt confident in his ability to follow. As everyone began packing up and leaving, Izuku stayed back, walking up to Mr. Aizawa's podium when it was just the two of them. Did you have a question about the syllabus? Aizawa asked, raising an eyebrow. No, sir. I just wanted to talk about what happened. You know, My quirk malfunction. Izuku was nervous about coming clean about his quirk, but he knew it was something important. My quirk is complicated. Aizawa seemed to grow serious as he heard that, immediately straightening up. Well, it's part of my job to uncomplicate it for you. So perhaps you'd like to pull up a chair. Izuku nodded, pulling over a desk to sit in while Aizawa sat down on top of another desk. Are you going to tell my mom? Or anyone else? Izuku asked, fiddling with his thumbs. He had to make sure. The last thing he needed was some secret organization busting down his door in the middle of the night to kidnap him and perform tests to see how he was seemingly immortal. That seemed to interest Aizawa even more as he leaned forward, bracing his elbows on his knees. Midoriya, anything you say in confidence stays in this room between the two of us. But I won't lie to you, if I feel like you are an immediate danger to yourself or others or that you are under any kind of duress, I'm obligated to report that. Immediately Izuku shook his head. It's nothing like that. It's just about my quirk. He said quickly, finally meeting Aizawa's eyes to show his sincerity. Then I see no problem in keeping this between the two of us. Good, that's good. Izuku, you don't have to do this. Really? I can tell how anxious this is making you. It's only your first day. Even so, Nana's hand carded through his hair, comfortingly helping Izuku to relax. I do though. He should know. Nana had no retort for that, but Izuku could feel her discomfort with the idea. Floating isn't my entire quirk. I gathered that, yes. Floating doesn't usually cause your body temperature to be lower. It also doesn't give you the ability to take down robots just by being in their proximity. Aizawa explained, taking a notepad off his podium. So how about you start with the things you can do? And from there we'll figure out why you can do them. That was a lot easier actually. Izuku didn't have to lie. He just had to keep some information to himself. I can do that. I can take energy from things. Like the robots. It gives me a power boost. He watched as Aizawa wrote everything down. And your file says you were a late bloomer. In fact, you didn't have your quirk registered until you were enrolling in UA. Aizawa pointed out. Yet you have a lot of control already. Izuku couldn't help but think that was thanks to Nana. She was the one who gave him energy. Really all he had to worry about was not vomiting when he used his floating too much. It's mostly instinctual. Aizawa nodded, making more notes. Have you ever accidentally used your quirk? Maybe in situations of high stress. When I get scared. Nana defends him when he gets scared. It feels kind of cheap taking all the credit for the quirk when Nana did most of it for him. Don't sell yourself short, Izuku. It's your plans and ideas that help me to help you. You must have been pretty scared to have your quirk activate so late in life. Izuku's brain screeched to a stop as the words left Aizawa's mouth. What did he mean by that? I mean that most kids get their quirks at a young age, but yours came in the last year. In most cases that happens because there's a trigger that finally brings out the quirk. Aizawa explained patiently. So I assume something happened and must have scared you enough for your quirk to trigger. Izuku didn't even know he had asked that out loud. And now he felt nerves creeping back in. He couldn't understand why Aizawa was focusing so much on how his quirk was triggered. Weren't they supposed to figure out what he could do first? I just fell. Falling triggered your quirk. Yeah. It must have been pretty high up. Why yeah, the concrete had rushed up to meet him. He could still smell the burning sweet scent of Bakugo's smoking palms pushing him over the edge. He didn't want to hit the ground. He was scared of dying a second time. At least the first time was his choice. But then again the second time ended up not being his choice either. He was up covered in his own blood looking down at himself as if it were a movie. Belatedly, he realized Aizawa had been talking to him. but Izuku knew they were getting off track. Aizawa was treating him like he didn't know what his quirk was, but he did. "Mr. Aizawa, I have a spirit that's bonded to me that helps me with my quirk." He spat out, watching as Aizawa froze mid-word. "Midoriya, that is a very bold claim." He asked instead, very seriously. "You have to understand how that sounds. Right?" He thought Izuku was crazy. Or confused. Filled with a sense of determination, Izuku held his chin up almost in defiance. "I can prove it." "Please do." Aizawa encouraged with a nod. "I do want to believe you, Midoriya. But I need proof." The proof is what he received as the lights started to dim and flicker in an indecipherable pattern above his head. The teacher's head jerked up to watch right before a shiver shook him from his seat on the desk. "Nana, that's enough," Izuku decided when he felt his point was made. At once, the activity stopped and Aizawa was silent for a moment. The silence didn't last long, however, as he seemed to get a grip on whatever thoughts were floating through his head. "Right, that does explain the control even with being a late bloomer," he said, writing things down. "Is there anything else you can tell me about this spirit?" "Keep me a spirit, Izuku. I do not know him, but he may know me. Better to be safe than sorry," Nana said softly, making it sound more like a request. As if Izuku would ever deny her the right to her own privacy like that. "Sweetie, I know you wouldn't. I'm just being cautious." That made Izuku feel slightly better as he looked at Aizawa, who seemed to be waiting patiently. "She's not like the spirits you see in films. She isn't vengeful or angry. I think she chose to be here instead of passing on." Izuku never had to put it into words before. It was honestly harder than he thought. "And you say she helps you?" Izuku nodded immediately with no sign of hesitation. "She does. A lot, especially with my quirk. In fact, she's really the one that handles the energy part. I can really only do the floating by myself." There was a moment of silence as Aizawa made a couple more notes before suddenly he shuddered again. Harsher this time, and Izuku could feel the warmth inside, signifying Nana was taking energy, albeit a small amount. "Nana, stop that!" Izuku demanded immediately. "What are you doing?" Izuku watched as Aizawa's shuddering stopped, leaving him panting and slightly slumped over on the desk. The pad of paper had fallen to the floor face up and Izuku bent down to pick it up. "I was reading what he wrote." Izuku, he's wrong." Nana pleaded as Izuku looked down at the writing and started to scan it for what seemed to make Nana so upset. "I would never hurt you." The note seemed pretty standard, mostly marking Izuku's abilities and other things they had discussed. That is, until Izuku got to the bottom. Izuku felt his stomach drop as he read through it all. He had been glad to see Aizawa's understanding of the whole situation, but this was different. Even after Izuku had tried to explain how Nana was peaceful, Aizawa didn't seem to believe him. He had been so happy to finally be able to share his quirk with an adult. Izuku hadn't stopped to think about Aizawa's motives. "Midoriya, I was just writing things down that came to mind," Aizawa tried explaining as he seemed to see Izuku's emotions play out on his face. "I didn't dash." "You're wrong," Izuku shouted suddenly, ripping the page from the pad and crumbling it up. "She wouldn't hurt me. I told you she wouldn't." Izuku had never felt so angry, but most of it was on Nana's behalf. How dare Aizawa accuse her of anything? Izuku had come to him in confidence because he thought the man could help them both grow stronger, but this... "I know," Aizawa raised his hands up in surrender as he took a step away from Izuku to give him space. "I should have trusted your judgment. You know her better than me, right?" Izuku thought the question was rhetorical, but Aizawa seemed to be looking for an actual response. "Yeah. You don't know her at all," he said defensively, putting the fresh pad of paper down and stuffing the notes into his backpack. No way would he leave them behind. "I don't know her." "Exactly. Aizawa seemed to be treating him like a wounded animal, giving him space and speaking quietly. I'm wrong. I admit that. I just want to help you, Midoriya. I'm a teacher. That's what I do. You're doing it wrong. Izuku sounded like a petulant child, but he couldn't help it. He wanted to be angry at Aizawa. But the man was admitting his mistake. As he said, he wanted to help Izuku. But Izuku didn't feel like he was comfortable continuing their conversation anymore. Then we should leave, honey. You don't owe him an explanation. We can try again another time, but you've had a rough day today. Let's get you home. Inko will be excited to hear about your first day. Nana cooed reassuringly, hugging Izuku warmly. Izuku nodded and saw Aizawa's slight confusion. I'm leaving. I don't want to talk anymore. He expected the nod that came his way as he grabbed his bag and tossed it over his shoulder. All right. And as I said, I won't share this conversation with anyone else. I won't even keep a written record if it helps you know I am sincere. Okay, I'm leaving now. Aizawa didn't seem to want to stop him, so Izuku headed for the door. See you tomorrow, Mr. Aizawa. See you tomorrow, child. Izuku left quickly, glad to see there wasn't anyone around to question him as he ran to the entrance gate. His day was mostly fun, despite the apparent fake looming threat of expulsion, the fact that his quirk was taken, and the fact that Aizawa seemed to believe Nana was some kind of demon who wanted to use Izuku to get what she wanted. Izuku, sweetie, it's alright. We'll keep our eyes on him and make sure he keeps to his word, alright? I want you to be able to trust him, seeing as how he's going to be your teacher. We all just got off on the wrong foot, alright? Nana's words were placating, but Izuku nodded anyway. He trusted his quirk to keep them together, and he trusted Nana to keep him safe. He could tell this pleased her, as her warmth never left his body the entire jog home. When he finally got home and changed out of his uniform, he flopped onto his bed and started to check his phone for messages. Surprisingly, there were a few from Shinsu. To Midoriya, hey, sorry about this morning. I fell asleep in the staff lounge and barely woke up in time for class. To Shinsu, that's fine. I was almost the last one to class anyway. To Midoriya, we'll have to go out for ramen later. How was your first day though? You missed the orientation ceremony. To Shinsu, Aizawa made us take a quirk assessment test. To rank our potential. I got 4th place. To Midoriya, yikes. But good job. To Shinsu, yeah, I tried telling him about Nana. Izuku spent the next hour telling Shinsu all about his day, from Itza greeting him before class to Izuku running home. Shinsu apologized for keeping Aizawa being his foster dad a secret, but Izuku waved him off. He explained that he understood the precaution and didn't hold it against him. On the other hand, Shinsu seemed just as upset as Izuku did when Izuku told Shinsu about the notes. Shinsu had been around Izuku and Nana to know she would never hurt him. She only protected him. It got to the point where Izuku was defending Aizawa to Shinsu as the boy seemed more and more irritated. To Midoriya, if it weren't for the fact that my other dad doesn't know, I'd go up to him right now and give him a piece of my mind. I knew I always liked him, Nana said smugly, and Midoriya relayed the information. Luckily that seemed to calm him down enough to where they just messaged about the orientation ceremony and the syllabus. Aside from Shinsu not having the quirk tests, there really didn't seem much of a difference between 1A and 1B. To Midoriya, do you care if we walk home together tomorrow? Maybe we can go to the ramen shop as well. To Shinsu, oh yeah. Let's do that. With any luck, it could become a tradition of theirs, and just like that, the pair seemed to forget about the stresses of the day in favor of happier topics. Chapter 14, Battle Training Part 1. New chapter finally. Izuku was relieved when Aizawa gave no hint about their conversation during his teachings. He was still the same grumpy instructor, but he never treated Izuku differently. Over the next week, Izuku found himself falling into a rhythm. He would wake up early most days and take the time to make a simple breakfast for himself and his mother, who would shuffle in right as he's about to finish his food. She takes time to wake up while he gets dressed and ready, and by the time he's walking to the door, she's there smiling happily. She wishes him a good day at school every day and sends Izuku off. Now, Izuku could ride public transport, but he found it easier to just walk the way to school. He needed the exercise now that the beach was clean, and walking was a great way to do it. He arrived at school at his usual time, and it seemed that the first day was an isolated incident of him being one of the last to arrive. Nowadays, he turned out to be one of the first. Itza was always ahead of him, greeting him with the same enthusiasm he always had. "Good morning, Midoriya. I hope you slept well. Looking forward to today?" he asks every time, and Izuku always nods. Because he does look forward to every day. Even when it's regular lectures about history or English, Izuku can't help but listen with rapt attention. He takes studious notes as always, which also makes Itza happy, and the pair often go over the morning's lessons during lunch. That is, until Eureka chimes in with a groan about how boring talk shouldn't be allowed at the lunch table. Even Azui, another one of their classmates that Eureka brought to their group, manages to chime in despite her often quiet nature. By the time the rest of the day's lessons pass by as normal, Izuku often waits by the gate for Shinsu to come out. As they walk their way home, they share their experiences throughout the day. Almost exact, curriculum-wise. But Izuku tended to teach more cohesively, anticipating questions before they're asked and working the answers into his lecture. Vlad King, the 1B homeroom teacher, tended to have more class discussions when questions arose. Nana seemed to enjoy the days that followed Izuku's talk with Izuku. She was enamored with every detail about UA, always telling Izuku how it differed from her time roaming the halls. Those little tidbits often put a smile on Itza's face as Izuku relayed them. It got to the point where Itza dove into research about their new school, even citing old student handbooks when Izuku brought up a fact he recognized. Of course, this was before Eureka would distract them. "I can't believe even when you don't talk about school, you still try to talk about school." She always says it as a joke, so Izuku and Itza never feel bad, but it was nice to have a reminder that not everything had to be about academics. It was nice, but everyone was antsy about their next training exercise. The kind that would put them apart from a regular high school. They got their wish the very next week as they waited for Izuku to shuffle into class. "I am here." Coming through the door like a hero. They heard announced from the doorway, and all speaking ceased as they watched All Might march in wearing his Silver Age uniform. The chatter picked up immediately as everyone whispered about how much they admired him and how cool he looked. Even Izuku couldn't keep a small smile off his face. He might not have had the best history with All Might, but there was no denying he was a powerful hero. If he were teaching them, there had to have been something amazing planned. As All Might introduced that they will practice combat training, the room split into several groups. There were those like Kaken, who was filled to the brim with excitement. There were those like Eureka, who was slightly worried about how the battles would happen. And there were some like Izuku who were both. But one of the keys to being a hero is looking good. As All Might said it, slots in the wall began to pull out, exposing cases with numbers. These were designed for you based on your quirk registration forms and the requests you sent in before school started. Immediately an uproar began. Even Nana was cheering along with the students. "You see, Izuku. This is one thing that never changes no matter how many years it's been." Each student collected their assigned case before All Might began leading them outside. UA's campus was so huge they had to take a large shuttle cart to get where they needed to be. And when they were there, they were herded off into the changing rooms to put on their new costumes. Izuku was very excited and nervous as he opened up his own case. He had agonized over his request form for so long, and of course, he knew the people who made their suits could make any alterations they felt were necessary. There was no telling what it would look like. Hurry up, I can't wait to see. I hope they got the colors right. Nana urged Izuku, who was just staring at his case. It was the final push he needed to open up the case, seeing his suit packed neatly inside. Underscore underscore underscore. Clothes make the pros, young ladies and gentlemen. And behold, you are the proof. From now on you are all heroes in training. Izuku stepped out of the changing room, pulling his gloves on still. His costume was almost exactly what he envisioned it to be. The only difference was the detail put into it. Not only him, it seemed as everyone else looked just as amazing in their costumes as well. Oh my, just look at all of you. Nana cooed. Ready for battle already? You all look so cool. All Might praised with his wild smile, and Nana squealed in agreement. Oh Toshi, I barely know any of them, and yet I'm already proud. They're going to do great things. Izuku felt like he wasn't supposed to hear that last part, so he chose to ignore it as he lined up with the rest of his class. Oh, Izuku. I love your costume. I can see you took inspiration from a few heroes. Uraraka said, pointing to his mask styled after Eraserhead's goggles. The function wasn't the same, so it was mainly aesthetically designed, but the yellow matched that of his gloves. But it's subtle too. Were you going for All Might's colors? Izuku was confused about what she meant before it clicked. All Might's costumes usually consisted of blue, yellow, red, and white. Of course, it seemed like he was emulating All Might when it was really Nana he took inspiration from. Who do you think Toshi got it from? Nana said smugly as Izuku tried to explain how he hadn't even thought about it looking like All Might slightly. Well, in any case, you look great. I should have been more specific about what I wanted. Uraraka said shyly. This bodysuit is skin tight? Not really my style. Izuku hadn't noticed before, but when called attention to, he did see how the costume hugged Uraraka's body very closely and his cheeks couldn't help but heat up. Her eyes are up there, Izuku. Nana teased him, and Izuku felt her touch his cheeks as if pinching them. Hush. It's not like that. He shouted back in his mind before addressing Uraraka. Well, maybe they weren't sure if your quirk could penetrate thick fabric. Like if you wanted to make yourself float? In that case tighter, thinner fabric would work best. Uraraka's eyes widened as she listened to him. Oh, that's so smart. That actually makes sense. And here I thought they just wanted to make it look sexy. That made Izuku's blush worse as he turned his head as if to look at the others. Yeah. He said after clearing his throat. Listen up, students. All Might called their attention back, and Izuku was amazed at the quick silence that followed as everyone tuned in. For this training exercise, you will be split into teams consisting of good guys and bad guys. The exercise involves these groups going head to head in teams of 2 in close quarters. Immediately questions started coming from all around. Surprisingly though, not from Izuku. Said boy was amazed as his classmates shouted their questions with the same excitement he usually had. Hold it now. I wasn't finished explaining. All Might said with a semi-forced chuckle. But your enthusiasm is appreciated. Now, the villain team is tasked with hiding a nuclear missile somewhere in their hideout. The hero team must foil their plans by either capturing them or finding the missile without being captured themselves. Now I'm sure you're wondering how the teams will be chosen. Izuku watched with the rest of his class as All Might reached for one out of several boxes at his feet. You will be drawing lots. He announced, holding it up. Lots? Isn't there a more professional way to handle the teams? Like comparative skill? Itza asked in general, and Izuku was drawn to the fact that Itza's costume looked like Ingenium. It made sense after all. their quirks were identical and Izuku remembered Ingenium being part of a family agency. But now wasn't the time for fanboying. I can see what you mean, but heroes don't usually get to pick who they fight with in real battles, so keeping it random helps stick to the authenticity of the exercise. Izuku told Itza with a smile as the taller boy nodded in realization. They got into a rough line to draw lots and Izuku found himself in last right behind the bird-headed student he had seen during the entrance exam. After receiving a small orb with a letter printed on it, they split up to find their teammate. Izuku himself was surprised and relieved to see he was teamed with Eureka. They had similar quirks, and they had already worked together somewhat. It was almost perfect. "Oh, Midoriya, my boy, I'd like to switch you to a different partner," All Might said calmly. "I feel you would learn more about the lesson here if you were with someone with a quirk not so similar to your own." Immediately Eureka and Izuku's faces dropped, but he was right of course. "Who should I partner with then?" he asked looking around. They had an even number of students in the class so there was no way for him to know who he would be partnered with until All Might said. "Good question. Attention, students. Raise your hand if you wouldn't mind switching partners with Midoriya," he said, and to Izuku's surprise, almost the entire class raised their hand. Kaken of course just sneered at him, Eureka couldn't, and well, he couldn't tell if the invisible girl was raising her hand or just stretching. "Midoriya, you can team up with Todoroki, then," All Might announced. "Glad that's settled. Now, let's see who we have up first." Izuku walked over to the split-haired boy he knew to be Todoroki Shoto and smiled. Todoroki wasn't very talkative. In fact, he often only spoke when called on. And when he was called out he always gave the right answer. He was smart but introverted. "My name is Midoriya Izuku " "I know." The boy answered flatly. Which made Izuku shrink back a little. "Oh, well, I look forward to working together." Todoroki said nothing and Izuku was left awkwardly standing off to the side as All Might drew the first villain and hero pair. "All right. We have Team D as the villains and Team B as the heroes." Izuku looked down at the new orb he was given and saw that that was him. Looking up, he immediately zoned in on the borderline feral smile Bakugo was giving him as he held up his own ball marked D. "Oh no. Group 1. Bakugo and Itza as villains vs Midoriya and Todoroki as heroes. Villains, you have 10 minutes to set up before the heroes come inside. Make it snappy. Heroes, I'd be using this time to formulate a plan before you charge in." All Might advised as he shooed the other students into a building. "We'll be watching from in here." Pretty soon, Izuku was left alone with Todoroki as Bakugo and Itza, and what a pair that would be, went into the building to set up. "So, any idea?" Izuku was cut off as Todoroki spoke. "We're splitting up." Immediately, Izuku flinched at the coldness in Todoroki's voice. To be fair, he did ask if Todoroki had an idea, but he expected more collaborating than to just be told what their plan was. "I don't think that's such a good dash." Todoroki's mismatched eyes turned to him harshly. "And why not?" Izuku scrambled to explain. Well, this is supposed to be a teamwork exercise. To simulate heroes teaming up together in the real world. That defeats the lesson All Might is trying to teach if we just split up. He waited a minute for a response as Todoroki seemed to consider it before shaking his head. "We're splitting up. Both their quirks are pretty loud, so if one of us gets captured, the other is most likely to hear it. It will also tell us if they plan on splitting up to both engage and guard the missile or if they're staying together. So you want one of us to sacrifice themselves so the other can maybe get to the missile?" Izuku asked in disbelief and was even more blown away as Todoroki nodded. "I can tell you what their plan is. I know Kaken and Itza A bell rang signifying the end of setup time and Todoroki took off into the building leaving Izuku behind. As he disappeared down a hall, a wall of ice shot up to form a barricade to prevent Izuku from following, which made the boy huff in irritation. "What's their plan, sweetie? I'll listen," Nana offered gently as Izuku took off in the opposite direction. "Kaken won't stay with the missile or work with Itza. Which leaves Itza guarding the missile because he won't leave it unprotected," Izuku explained in his head, seeing as how he wasn't sure if he could be seen talking to himself. "If I know Kaken. Which of course you do. Right. If I know Kaken, he'll come for me directly. The best case scenario is he finds Todoroki and Todoroki traps him in ice. Kaken would rather wait for Todoroki to leave and find Itza before he breaks himself out to look for me again. So either way, I'm looking at a fight with Kaken while Todoroki finds the missile." As Izuku finished his explanation, he peeked around a corner and continued to the next floor up to look for Kaken. "I'll scout ahead," Nana offered, and Izuku nodded. "What does the electricity look like in here?" "All I see are a few lights and cameras. That's basically all there is. This means I can help you a little if Bakugo shows up, but I have a feeling Toshinori will stop the battle if all the cameras go dark. So I'm mostly on my own." "I'm sorry, Izuku. It wasn't her fault," Izuku knew. He was just bound by his own secret. In a real villain fight, Izuku wouldn't think twice about using every resource, but here he was essentially in a maze while under the careful eye of his entire class. "I gotcha, damn nerd," Kaken shouted right behind Izuku, and there was no time to react as a blast knocked Izuku on his front, sending him skidding across the concrete for a few meters. Luckily, it had padding along the elbows and knees, and his mask kept his face from scraping the ground. Well, at least Todoroki would hear that. I'm so happy with the feedback I've been getting for this story, and I hope you all enjoy the newest chapter. As the story grows, I've noticed I've been getting more comments, and that's great, but I find it hard to reply to every. Chapter 15, Battle Training Part 2. Izuku was barely able to catch his breath before he was hoisted up and shoved into the wall harshly by Kaken. Said Ashen Blonde nearly spat in his face as he spoke. "You think you're so powerful now? You get a shitty little quirk and you think that makes us equals. I'm going to enjoy kicking your ass, Deku." Kaken removed a hand from Izuku as he powered up his quirk, and Izuku took the opportunity to duck under his other arm and run down the hall. He couldn't fight Kaken head-on. His quirk was stronger and Izuku was already at the disadvantage. "Izuku, sweetie, just tell me what you want me to do and I'll back you up." Nana offered support, and Izuku found himself relaxing just slightly for it. He wasn't alone in this fight. Even if Todoroki left him. "Watch my back," was the only instruction Izuku gave as he darted around a corner, covering his own mouth to keep from making too much noise. Kaken should still be following him. His observation was correct as he heard the other boy run past, noticing a second too late where Izuku was hiding. This was Izuku's opening as he grabbed Bakugo by his dominant hand and used his momentum to throw him onto his shoulder. Izuku watched as Bakugo collapsed onto his back, knocking the wind out of him. "Take that, you spoiled brat," Nana sneered as she cheered. The battle was far from over, however. Using Izuku's moment of triumph, Bakugo kicked his legs out from under him, sending Izuku crashing to the ground with a thud. They went back and forth on this, Izuku pushing Bakugo away, trying to flee once more. Bakugo wouldn't let that happen a second time, it seemed, as he used his quirk to discombobulate Izuku every time he was close to getting away. Izuku was left blinking the white spots out of his vision, ears ringing every time until Bakugo was on top of him. The other boy grabbed the front of his costume and shook Izuku harshly. "You see? I'm still better than you. You can't beat me. I beat you in the quirk apprehension tests and I'm going to beat you here." "Kaken, what did I do?" Izuku couldn't help but ask, probably speaking louder than he needed to as he couldn't quite hear that well at the moment. "I kept it secret. I told Izawa I fell." There was a split second of processing before Bakugo seemed to understand what he meant. By the gnashing of his teeth, Izuku could tell he had said the wrong thing even before his side lit up in pain from an explosion. It was so powerful at such close range Izuku could feel the breeze coming from the hole left as the fabric was destroyed. You think you can get me expelled? Is that it? Can't beat me so you try to get rid of me. I told you, you fucking Deku, you fell on your own. It was the wrong thing to say, but Kaken was acting so crazy, Izuku didn't know what to do. Toshi's telling him to back off or he'll cancel the battle. Nana told him but Bakugo didn't seem to care. Why you pushed me? You pushed me and I fell. Izuku yelled loud enough for anyone in the hall to hear. Shut up. Shut up. Shut up. Bakugo said, gearing up for a close-range blast to Izuku's face. Nana. Grab him. Izuku called out as he saw the grenade-style gauntlet reach for his face for what was sure to be a knockout blow. It was his last resort now to use Nana's help. There was no way he could get out of this on his own. And how weak did that make him? Izuku watched with his partial vision as Bakugo shivered harshly, arms shaking. What the hell dash? Use the capture tape, Izuku. Bakugo was easy to throw off with the added strength Nana's hold gave him as he tried to compose himself from the force of Nana's hold, but it was all the time Izuku needed as he looped the capture tape around Bakugo's wrists. His fight was weak as a kitten's, leaving Izuku an easy time apprehending him finally. He didn't wait around for Nana to let go of Bakugo before he took off up the stairs to try to find Todoroki. With Bakugo down, they should have no problem taking Itza down together. Are you alright? Nana asked worriedly. You took some pretty hard hits back there. I'm fine. It's just a few bruises. Thank you for stepping in. You never have to thank me for saving you, Nana told him firmly. Never. Izuku felt her warmth along his arm as he ran to the left side of the building. There were several trails of slowly melting ice that caught Izuku's attention and he followed them until he saw the two-toned hair of Todoroki coming down the stairs. There was a split second as Todoroki saw him and raised an arm to attack, but realized in the last moment who it was in front of him. Immediately a scowl overtook his face. I said we were splitting up. He said, walking back the way Izuku had come. Don't go that way. Izuku warned. I captured Bakugo, but if I know him he's going to be pretty angry. Todoroki paused in his steps as if finally taking in Izuku's bare side and dirted costume. I ran into him earlier. We had a little back and forth but he let me go. I went up to the 5th floor and started clearing the floors. The missile isn't on the 5th or 4th. We're on the 3rd. It would be foolish to have it on the 1st floor. So it must be on the 2nd. He finally explained, which surprised Izuku. The 2nd floor, makes sense. Izuku agreed. Kaken is captured, so that leaves Itza. He's fast, but can only focus on one of us at a time. You float, right? Izuku nodded. I can freeze the entire floor of the room, which should trap Itza. Which gives you time to get to the missile and then we win. It was such a relief working as a team finally, and Izuku nodded happily. The pair ran down to the 2nd floor on the left side of the building and found the room Itza was guarding pretty easily. Itza seemed to, get into character, and Izuku tried hard not to laugh at how serious he was. Even putting on a voice. Todoroki didn't have the same issue as he immediately started to freeze the floor. Why, you heroes are no match for me. Itza was interrupted as the ice started climbing up his legs, jamming his engines and keeping him stationary. Oh no, Bakugo! He shouted, his voice carrying far in the empty room. Bakugo, they're in here. I'm frozen to the floor. Izuku couldn't help but smirk in satisfaction as he activated his floating quirk and started to fly over to the missile. He can't save you now. Izuku was only inches away from the missile before an intense rumbling started shaking the whole building. Without his concentration, he fell to the icy floor, struggling to get to his feet without slipping. The earthquake luckily settled soon enough, however. But that didn't last long as a hole burst open from the wall, sending concrete and shrapnel everywhere. Izuku sustained a few cuts but considered himself rather lucky, as that was all. Finally, as the smoke cleared, Bakugo's smug face was revealed. "You think some shitty tape can stop me? You're pathetic, Deku. I believe you're taking the villain persona too far," Bakugo-Itza tried to say, only to be interrupted. "Shut up, Glasses. I don't care about this dumb exercise." With a series of quick explosions, the ice coating the floor was shattered faster than it could reform. The ice broke in a path straight for Deku, and he finally managed to pull himself up from the ground. "Why Yuri out?" All Might said. "The capture tape dash. Doesn't matter. I got out." Izuku started floating once more, backing up onto the ice enough to be free from Bakugo's blasts. "Todoroki, freeze him. IICC Kenti." Looking over, Izuku was horrified to see Todoroki's breath coming out in puffs of mist, frost spreading up from his cheek. He had overused his quirk. He was freezing. Which meant Izuku was on his own, again. But Bakugo wasn't advancing towards him. "Hey, Deku. You know how my quirk works, don't you?" He looked like a predator who found wounded prey as he smiled, lifting his gauntlet slowly. "I secrete nitroglycerin like sweat from my pores on my hands and make it blow up. Imagine what I could do if I had a lot of it." It was then Izuku realized that the gauntlets weren't just for aesthetic designs. They were shaped like grenades for a reason. There was a small ticking noise as a pin poked out from the side. Kaken didn't need to get close to him anymore. Not when he had a built-in projectile. The earthquake from earlier made a lot of sense now. Bakugo had to get out of the capture tape, and it felt like he almost destroyed the building, and he still had another gauntlet left, and it was pointed right at Izuku. "Bakugo, stop. You'll kill him." Itza shouted, trying in vain to untrap his engine legs. "He'll be fine as long as he dodges." Bakugo spat as he pulled the pin with a click. Izuku's entire field of vision turned red as he suddenly felt a blast of warmth inside him. "Run!" Nana yelled out, and Izuku did just that. The floor ice was melting, which meant Izuku had a little more traction than before. That, coupled with his floating, propelled him off to the side in a split second, just as his shoulder exploded in a flash of blinding hot pain. But despite the pain, Izuku charged ahead for the missile. The room was full of smoke and ash, but Izuku didn't care. He knew where the missile was, and as soon as his hand touched the cool metal he felt relief. That is, until there was no announcement. "Izuku, I'm sorry, I think I fried the cameras," Nana said, almost deathly quiet. There was no announcement. There were no cameras. All Might didn't know the match was over. Luckily, however, the man seemed smart enough to know that the cameras going dark meant something terrible had happened. For as the smoke finally cleared, All Might, symbol of peace, was standing in the middle of the torn-apart room. Izuku was safe. "Bakugo, I allowed you to continue the fight seeing as how you escaped your bindings, but I told you not to use that blast again. You could have seriously injured someone. I understand I said this was a mock battle, but you should know better than to cross lines like that. Get changed and go to Principal Nedzu's office this instant." He scolded angrily, pointing to the door. "This is a hero school. You'd do well to remember that." Bakugo looked speechless as he was scolded by the man he aspired to be better than. But once the message sunk in, he threw his gauntlets down in anger and stomped away. As soon as his grumbling self had disappeared around the corner, all eyes turned to Izuku. "Are you all right, Han?" Nana asked gently. "That shoulder doesn't look too good." Izuku's head turned to look at the shoulder and hissed when the motion pulled at the wound. The skin was dark and black, blistering in places and completely missing in others. And the smell, Izuku had to turn away before he made himself sick. By the time he was able to open his eyes again, Itza, Todoroki, and All Might were rushing over to his side. "Itza, my boy, run and get Recovery Girl. I don't want to move him if there's something wrong with his spine." All Might ordered and sighed in relief as Itza did so. The remaining pair crouched on either side of Izuku in the meantime. "Midoriya, how do you feel?" "How the hell do you think he feels, Toshinori?" Nana grumbled, but Izuku waved it off. "My shoulder stings and I think my ribs are bruised. But I don't think I have a concussion," Izuku summarized as he watched Todoroki's hand coat itself in ice and hover over his wounded shoulder. The heat from the wound immediately caused the ice to melt slightly, causing steam to rise into the air. "I'm sorry for letting the battle go on for so long. Had I known how unhinged young Bakugo would become, I would have never let him rejoin the fight." Izuku waved it off with his good hand. "You couldn't have known." The trio was quiet as Itza arrived back with Recovery Girl. The old woman smiled down at them even as she took in the damage done to Izuku's arm. "Oh dear, look what we have here. Don't worry, I'll have this healed in a jiffy." Her lips puckered up and kissed Izuku on the forehead, causing an intense wave of exhaustion to wash over him, nearly knocking him out. "Well, I was afraid that might happen." Recovery Girl sighed and Izuku forced his eyes open to hear what she had to say. "It isn't healed yet," Todoroki mentioned in confusion. "And it won't. Not now at least. He's too exhausted. If I tried healing him completely I could kill him." Nana gasped in Izuku's ear and Izuku echoed her sentiment. "He'll just have to rest. But I fear by the time I'm able to try again, the skin tissue will have already started healing itself." All Might spoke next. "Isn't that good?" Recovery Girl waved her hand. "Yes and no. My quirk can't distinguish between healed skin and scarred skin. So I can heal the majority of the injury, but there will still be a bit of scarring in place." Izuku watched as Todoroki's head ducked down as if hiding his own scarring on his eye. "I see." There was silence between the group before Recovery Girl stood up once more. "Someone bring him to my office so he can have a nap." "Not you, All Might. You still have a class to run. And I better not have to come back out here." She scolds harshly, wagging her finger in All Might's face. It was funny considering the major height difference, but All Might still looked shaken. "Yes, ma'am." "Itza, would you mind?" "Not at all, sir," Itza said, walking over to Izuku and kneeling down. One hand supporting Izuku's back and the other supporting his knees, Itza lifted Izuku easily enough. He made sure not to press on the still wounded skin of Izuku's shoulder as he marched with Recovery Girl. It was then, Izuku found it hard to stay awake. Recovery Girl said he needed rest, so there shouldn't be harm in him taking a few minutes nap. "Sleep, sweetie." Nana chuckled as she pet his hair. Izuku felt Itza shiver, slightly jostling him, but it faded quickly before he fell asleep. Chapter 16, Recovery. The last year had held more excitement for Nana Shimura than the last decade of her afterlife. She was ashamed to admit that she had gotten complacent in her day-to-day life. Toshinori was...
I might just want to see if there's anything else. Okay, this is not a recovery chapter, this is more than that. Okay.
The success. A legend. Even with his injury, the hours he was able to be All Might were filled with grand displays of power. But it was always the same. It was like watching the same movie over and over. The first few decades are fun and all, but after a while. Nana loved Toshinori. She watched him grow into the man he was today, but it was clear she wasn't needed anymore. Gone were the days Toshi would stay up late at night talking to thin air, asking for guidance. Now Nana was left with the occasional visit to her grave. She knew Toshi wasn't forgetting her. He would never. He loved her like a mother. He was just moving on. Nana couldn't explain how much that hurt. Her afterlife changed the day she met that little green-haired boy on the rooftop. In his eyes, she saw hope. And in the same instance, she watched that hope crumble. Toshinori. How could you say that? She yelled as she watched her successor walk out of the building as if nothing was wrong. Deep inside, she felt the other holders hum in agreement with her fury. She couldn't leave the boy like that. By her calculations, she had at least a few minutes before Toshi walked out of bounds and Nana was forced to follow him. In the meantime, she would stay with the heartbroken little boy hoping to ease his pain. And then she passed right through him as he jumped off the building. The rest was, as they say, history. Nana had meant to lead the little boy to the other side of the afterlife, maybe even go with him. But as they both touched his body, she felt herself being pulled thin. Her connection to Toshinori snapped. From there, Nana found a new purpose. It was like nursing a little bird back to health. She gathered up all the pieces of Izuku's shattered dream and glued it back together. She spoke to him, and to her amazement, he could actually listen. Nana had found her new purpose. And now she was watching him sleep in a hospital bed. He looked so small and peaceful. The costume he wore before was ruined, unfortunately. Recovery Girl cut through it with medical-grade shears to gain access to his wounds. With her healing quirk obsolete, she had to settle for old-fashioned methods of healing. His shoulder was like a bad sunburn. But worse. Even with the skin somewhat knitted back together, there was still damage. It would scar. Izuku's first scar of his hero career. And it was given to him by a student. Someone who should have been a friend. Nana watched Izuku rest somewhat peacefully for hours. The class was already over and Nana was sure Inko was worried. But it wasn't like Nana could call her. It was then, however, that two people entered the nurse's office. Izawa, Izuku's homeroom teacher, and a bear-slash-mouse creature in a suit. "Ah! What brings you two into my office?" Recover Girl asked with a smile. It was the animal creature that stepped up first. "We came to inquire about young Midoriya. Is he still asleep?" The happy cheerful face on Recovery Girl slipped into a scowl so suddenly it gave Nana whiplash. Of course he's still asleep. He's exhausted. He sustained second and third degree burns to his shoulder and almost his face. 2 bruised ribs. This is only the second week, and I fear his condition by the second semester. Cho, your anger is warranted, but trust me to handle the situation. But we really need to speak with young Midoriya if at all possible. The creature spoke and Recovery Girl sighed, straightening her hair back into its bun. He should wake up soon, but you must get him to eat as soon as he wakes up. And don't stress him out. The more he aggravates the injury the worse it'll heal. She advised, pointing to the bed where Izuku slept. The duo headed straight for Izuku and Nana was left stepping into the free spot at the foot of the bed Izuku was in. Izuku's wound had been bandaged up already, but that didn't stop Izawa from looking like Izuku was bleeding out. What did you decide to do with Bakugo? Izawa asked with crossed arms. His voice was hard and Nana could tell he was angry. Good. It was about time someone was angry on Izuku's behalf. The creature, Nedzu apparently if he was deciding what to do with Bakugo, spoke with a speculative look. For now I've suspended him. He was mostly silent in our conversation, but he seemed sure that Midoriya would dodge the blast. I sent him home until I've had a talk with Midoriya on what he would like to be done. Probably nothing, Nana mused bitterly. Bakugo had Izuku wrapped so tight around his finger. Izawa, you've taught them for a week now. What can you tell me about the boy? Nedzu asked as he slipped into his seat. It was quiet for a moment as Aizawa watched the sleeping child. He's a late bloomer, so it's safe to assume he's a victim of bullying. Of course, we all know how a child can go through life this long and then suddenly manifest a quirk. Remember when I spoke to you about his quirk malfunction? Yes. You said he seemed unconcerned, he didn't want to speak to me directly about it. It matches to All Might's claim. He said Izuku seemed unconcerned about his own wound after the battle. Aizawa spoke, running his hand over his face. So we have a child with little regard for his own safety and a problematic past. You seem pretty interested in this child, Aizawa, Nedzu observed with a disarming smile. This earned him a forced shrug. He has a lot of potential if only he could be bothered to care a little more about his own well-being. Ain't that the truth? Slinking over, Nana passed her hand through Aizawa's. She watched a shiver roll through his shoulder before he stepped to the side, making room for her next to Izuku. The spirit smiled as she rested her hand on Izuku's. I believe there's more to it than that. And I believe it relates to this entity here with us now. Nedzu said, and Nana felt fear for the first time in a long while as his eyes stared directly at her. Aizawa tensed up but kept facing Nedzu. What are you talking about? Surely you've sensed them already, Aizawa. They're standing right beside you. Or could it be you're trying to hide your own knowledge of the spirit's existence? Perhaps that's what has you so interested in young Midoriya. The tension in the room could be cut with a knife as the two adults stared at each other. And to make the situation worse, Izuku was finally showing signs of waking up. Looks like we can ask him ourselves. ____. Izuku woke up slowly, a sense of confusion washing over him. His shoulder was numb instead of stinging in pain, the exhaustion was mostly receded, and he was looking into the faces of several people. It's all right, Izuku. You're safe in the nurse's office. Itsu carried you here, remember? Nana asked, and Izuku remembered slowly. Hello, Midoriya. It's unfortunate we had to meet this way. Izuku looked over to see a bear-like creature holding a paw out for him to shake. I'm Principal Nedzu. Izuku barely remembered Aizawa referring to him after his quirk malfunction. He had to admit, for the principal of UA, Izuku expected him to be something more. Even so, he reached out with his good hand and shook the paw slowly. Hello, AM. I in trouble? Oh Izuku, sweetie, no. Nana cooed to him as Aizawa shook his head. Not at all, young Midoriya. We just have to speak with you about some very important matters. Principal Nedzu assured. I also called your mother. She's worried, but I assured her you're getting the best physical care here at UA. After our discussion, I will have someone drive you home. Thank you. There was silence as the four weren't sure how to continue on with the conversation. I've suspended Bakugo Katsuki for the next few days. Nedzu blurted suddenly. Izuku's eyes widened and he tried to sit up only to wince harshly as his injury was pulled. At once, there were hands gently keeping him in place. He had no choice as he was slowly lowered back onto the bed by Aizawa. Why? What did Kaken do? He asked, accepting the juice pouch handed to him by Aizawa. It helped to ease the dryness of his throat caused by inhaling dust particles from the ruble. Nedzu's smile fell slightly as he cleared his throat. Well, Mr. Midoriya, he disobeyed direct orders from his instructor, which led to you being seriously injured. The suspension is only the beginning of young Bakugo's punishment. I'm okay, though. Really I am. He shouldn't be suspended for hurting me. It was part of the exercise. Izuku implored. We were supposed to treat it as a real battle. It was time for Aizawa to speak up as he gave the bedridden boy a strict stare. Midoriya, All Might warned him several times not to use his gauntlet blast again because he risked collapsing the building with all of you inside. Not only did he use it, but he also aimed it directly at you. Had you not dodged, there's no telling what kind of state you'd be left in. UA may be training you all to be heroes, but we have rules in place to keep you all safe. Bakugo's disregard for those rules put you in danger, and until Nezu decided what further actions need to be taken, Bakugo will be suspended. Izuku looked back and forth from the two in amazement. He could understand the rules and their worry, but he was fine. He was telling them he was okay. His shoulder hurt, yes, but he'd had a lot worse. That's not something to brag about, sweetie. So our first order of business is to ask you what kind of action you would like us to take in regards to Bakugo's further punishment. Izuku spoke even before the sentence had finished leaving Nezu's mouth. Nothing. Really? We fought, he won, it's over. What couldn't they understand about that? Izuku, what if it were Uraraka he had aimed that gauntlet at? Nana asked softly. Izuku felt fear rise within him at the very thought. Uraraka wasn't weak by any means. But one of Bakugo's blasts, she wasn't fast like Izuku or Itza. She wasn't as strong as them. See? It could have just as easily been her on the line. You would want Bakugo punished then, right? What makes now so different? I know, Kaken, Izuku spoke, seemingly interrupting something one of the adults were trying to tell him. I've dealt with him for years. I know how he attacks, I know how he thinks. He knows I know him. You watched the tapes, right? He knew I could dodge that blast. Izuku was near hysterical as he tried to get his point across. He couldn't have known what would happen. Izawa said just as urgently. You students are barely in your first week here, do you really think you have what it takes to analyze the consequences of your actions on the grand scale? It wasn't that bad. Izuku's argument weakened. That blast was powerful enough to damage the foundation of the building. It was completely unusable for the other students. Had he hit a support beam in the room, the entire top 3 floors could have crushed you all. Izawa insisted. Izuku felt tears well up in his eyes. Had he really been so close to losing his friends? Todoroki was cold, but not malicious. And Itza, Izuku knew for a fact he had the potential to be great. Had their lives been that close to being cut short? Why me? Why do I have to decide? His lip quivered despite his attempts to stay together. The adults seemed to take a collective sigh of relief before Nezu addressed Izuku's question. I thought that as the main victim of the blast, you would like some say in what happens to him. But you're right. That is a lot to put onto one child. I apologize, young Midoriya. A tissue came into his field of vision and Izuku accepted it without hesitation. It's okay. He said automatically. You're so kind, Izuku. Even to people who don't deserve it? Nana sighed as she wrapped her arm around him. I say expulsion is in order, Izawa said, but Izuku saw him flinch as Izuku's head whipped around. No. You can't. Izuku shouted. He can be a great hero. His quirk is unlike any I've seen before. Why, you heard about how he defeated a villain all by himself in middle school, right? You've already suspended him. That's enough. The lights started flickering above Izuku as he grew more and more worked up. That's not me, Izuku, I think you're pulling in the dash. From the front of the nurse's office, Recovery Girl came barreling in. I told you two to not stress him out. You may be teachers, but this is still my office, and when I tell you to leave a patient alone, I mean it. Izuku suddenly felt a wave of peace roll over him. His muscles relaxed from their tensed position just as the lights stopped flickering. Looking over, he saw Recovery Girl removing a syringe from his IV there. That should help with pain and keep him from overexerting himself. Midoriya, child. Do you want them to leave? You don't have to force yourself past your limits. It took a moment as Izuku thought about it. He really did want them to leave, but at the same time, they said there were other things that needed to be discussed. Okay, ma'am. Recovery girl sighed heavily as she patted his limp hand. I should have known. All right. But don't be afraid to tell them off if they upset you again. Her finger wagged in his face and he couldn't help but smile. Now, I'm going to bring you something light to eat. Do you want a pudding cup or jello? Jello, please. She nodded, her signature smile coming back into place. Such good manners. Perhaps they can rub off on these two while I'm gone. Once more, recovery girl left, leaving the four of them alone. Izuku turned to Nezu with the saddest look he could muster. Please don't expel Bakugo. We can talk about that later while you're healed. Aizawa butted in. I think we should move on to the next order of business. That seemed reasonable, so Izuku nodded. What he wasn't prepared for was Nezu rubbing his paws together like a movie villain and asking, Midoriya, were you aware that you had a spirit following you? Quite closely, I may add. Fuck. Midoriya. Izuku, watch your mouth. Nana scolded. He really couldn't help it though. He had expected the conversation to get easier when they moved away from the topic of Kaken. And now it felt like the rug had been pulled out from under him. He was left gaping like a fish with his mouth opening and closing repeatedly. What are you talking about? That was exactly what Aizawa here said when I mentioned the spirit's presence before you woke up. I understand your hesitance to tell me, but I can assure you I'm trustworthy. I'm the principal of one of the best hero schools in the world after all. That kind of position doesn't come without being dependable. Nezu paused as the intriguing look was replaced with something more contemplative. Or could it be you're possibly under duress? She wouldn't hurt me. Izuku spat quickly in Nana's defense. But as soon as the words left his mouth he knew he was caught. He could have pretended he didn't know what Nezu was talking about until he eventually gave up and left, but now there was no denying. Nana, I'm sorry. He said in his mind, hoping he hadn't just ruined everything for both of them. You have nothing to apologize for, sweetie. It was going to come out eventually, we may even be able to work this to our favor. She went to hug him gently, avoiding the bandages on his shoulder as if she could actually hurt him. Izuku watched Nezu's eyes track the movement. Ah, I see. Of course, she wouldn't hurt you. She cares for you, doesn't she? There was no mocking tone, and for that Izuku was grateful. You can see her. Izuku answered his question with another one, but luckily there was no anger at his actions as Nezu smiled. Not in the way you see with your eyes. Truthfully, I can't see anything. But I can feel her. It's quite hard to miss actually. She's very strong. Is he trying to flatter me? Maybe. Izuku didn't know what to say. I think it's time to come clean here, sweetie. With everything. Everything except one for all. That stays a secret no matter what, okay? Izuku didn't know how much time had passed in their little exchange, but when he came back to focus both adults were looking at him with slight worry. Her name is Nana. Even though Izuku couldn't see Aizawa's face, he knew the man must have been shocked. After all, Izuku had barely given him any information at all before. He just acknowledged Nana's existence. This was a whole new territory. And Izuku knew it would get worse. She's bonded to me and she wouldn't ever hurt me. Izuku made the point very clear. He was tired of people accusing Nana of hurting him or using him. They're just concerned, sweetie. They don't know me. Nana soothed. They should. Everyone should know her. Nana was a hero. And a brave one on top of that. She died protecting the world from All for One. And yet nobody ever knew. She just seemed to disappear. What else can you tell us about her? Nezu asked, knowing that wasn't the end. Nana never left Izuku's side as he spoke. She wants her past to stay private. But I can tell you she was a hero. A great hero. There was a pause where Izuku assumed the two adults shared a look before Aizawa spoke. I don't think I've heard of her before. You don't have to be famous to be a good hero, Izuku said with as much conviction as he could muster. You should know plenty about that. That earned him a small smirk from Aizawa that Izuku saw as he looked up. Aizawa's hand reached out to ruffle his green hair gently. You're right about that, problem child. That small token of affection helped Izuku muster the courage to say more. Mr. Aizawa, about a year ago I jumped off a building with the intent to kill myself, Izuku admitted, and if it weren't for the sedative he probably wouldn't have been able to admit it so smoothly. At once, the mood in the room dropped. Aizawa's hand in his hair grew still at the same time as Nezu almost slipped off his seat. Nana tried comforting him by wrapping him in warmth, but Izuku still felt tears well up in his eyes as Aizawa slowly removed his hand from his head. I almost succeeded, but Nana was there. She wanted to help me however she could and then All Might found his body. Izuku couldn't imagine what he must have felt seeing the body of a child he has spoken to only minutes prior. He probably thought Izuku would trudge home and cry into his pillow for a few days before ultimately getting over it. Maybe even taking his advice and becoming an officer or an EMT. But instead, Izuku jumped. We bonded somehow. I think it was my quirk. You know how you said quirks can be triggered? I think that's what it was. Izuku was getting restless. It was way too quiet. Please say something. Since then, have you ever thought about trying to kill yourself again? Aizawa said almost clinically after a second. No, of course not. Things got better after Nana came into my life. I started working out. I met Shinsu. I had a friend. Izuku tried to smile but it fell flat. I had something to live for, I guess. Nezu seemed to think it an appropriate time to chime in finally. This time, however, he wasn't as cheerful and peppy as he seemed to be before. Well, young Midoriya, I'm sorry you felt that suicide was your only option. And I must inform you that I am requiring you to attend at least a few sessions with UA's guidance counselor. I think that's a good idea, Izuku. But would I have to tell them about Nana? I don't really want that to be public knowledge. In fact, it's important that nobody else knows about her. I understand your concern. And trust me when I say that you don't have to tell him any more than you want to. He will have to perform a suicide assessment, but that shouldn't be too hard for you to pass if you say you've moved on from those thoughts. Nezu was firm and surprisingly assertive for a short animal-like person. Izuku nodded as he balled up the sheets in his fists. Okay. Now he felt a blush creep up onto his cheeks. There's more I have to tell you both. About my quirks. Aizawa seemed to agree. You mean the floating quirk? Your paperwork states that it seems to be a mutation on your mother's quirk. It's possible, but it didn't come until months after I bonded with Nana. After I tried to die, went unsaid. I fell off a bridge. Pushed actually. And I started floating before I hit the ground. Nezu seemed almost excited as Izuku would be at the thought of analyzing a quirk. Oh. It seems that you have multiple quirks for multiple triggering events. Fascinating. Izuku wasn't used to such enthusiasm being directed at him, so his eyes fell to his lap as he tried to hide his smile. Something like that, and the lights thing is mostly just Nana. She can drain energy from appliances or people sometimes. It sort of gives me a power boost. And that was how he defeated the robots in the entrance exam. Aizawa summarized for Nezu. And my quirk seems to suppress his bond with the spirit, Nana. Which caused him to overheat during the quirk apprehension tests. That wasn't your fault, Izuku said immediately. You couldn't have known how my body would react. Aizawa's intense stare was leveled his way. Regardless, I am an adult and I shouldn't have activated my quirk on a child without cause just to prove a point. You had a right to. I didn't. I'm not Hitashi's parent when I am teaching. I can't let biases get in the way of that. Aizawa wasn't letting up, but Izuku hated the idea of letting Aizawa believe the entire thing was his fault. Izuku, other people can take the blame for what happens sometimes. You don't have to carry it all. Nana assured gently. Izuku's lips thinned as he forced himself to keep quiet. Deep down he knew she was right, but that didn't stop him from wanting to take it all. It would be so much easier that way. Well, now it seems we have a student with multiple quirks that could cause quite a stir if they were to be found out. Nezu summarized. I think we ought to keep this between the three. He cut himself off by clearing his throat. Excuse me, four of us. I like him. Izuku couldn't help but grin at that as well. Besides Shinsu, nobody had ever acknowledged Nana as her own person before. It was pretty surreal. And so Midoriya can continue to train his quirk to its fullest capabilities. I believe we'll have to come up with an explanation, won't we? Aizawa shrugged. I've been putting some thought into it. I'm pretty sure we can pass his quirk off as some kind of electromagnetic manipulation quirk. It would explain the energy transference, the gravity manipulation, and the temperature difference. And that way nobody has to know about the spirit business. It was a good explanation. Izuku doubted any of his classmates were interested enough to research electromagnetism. And he had an opening to train his entire quirk. It was foolproof. And all too soon after they had agreed on their mutual story, Recovery Girl came back with a small tray of food including a small jello cup on the side. Here you go, child. Fresh from lunch rush. Thank you, Recovery Girl. Izuku said happily as he gratefully dug into the meal. He only hoped that his classmates wouldn't pester him too much tomorrow about where Bakugo would be. The ending was a bit rushed, but I think this chapter came out well. And the contents was decided via a poll on our Discord server. I hope you all enjoy it. Discord link. Chapter 17, Reporter Horde. I hope you guys like the splits in POV. Previously. All Might tried hard to keep his signature smile on his face as he entered the surveillance room with Todoroki in tow. Aiza had taken young Midoriya to Recovery Girl while Bakugo was sent to the principal's office. It was eerily quiet as he stood in front of the students and cleared his throat. All right, students. Who can tell me what went wrong? Several hands shot up and All Might motioned to the green-haired girl up front. Yes, you. Azui Tsuyu. Well, I think it started to go wrong as soon as Todoroki abandoned Midoriya at the start. She said bluntly. This is a teamwork exercise and he decided to go in on his own, which eventually led to his teammate being injured. There was a chorus of nods and murmurs as well as several more hands going up. All Might pointed to another student. Yaoyorozu Momo, you're up. She paused as she thought about her answer. Bakugo shouldn't have left Aiza on his own to guard the missile so he could fulfill a personal vendetta. And like Azui said, Todoroki shouldn't have left Midoriya at the start. This went on as people started pointing out more and more mistakes on both Todoroki and Bakugo's part, but miraculously, they seemed to ignore Aiza and Midoriya. Anything else? All Might asked finally. There was silence as nobody spoke. Then, it was the Gravity Girl that All Might had changed Midoriya's partner from. She seemed hesitant as she stepped forward. I think I know a mistake. Don't be afraid to share. This is constructive just as much as it is critique. Well, the girl looked down at her feet as she spoke. Didn't you mess up, sir? I don't mean any disrespect of course, but it just seemed that just when you let Bakugo escape even after he showed clear signs of aggression towards Midoriya. All Might let his smile drop for a moment as he nodded. You are completely right, Eureka. I did mess up. And you were brave enough to point it out? You see, students, I did see young Bakugo's temper. But when he escaped I thought it would have been a good lesson to teach you students about adaptability. I thought that by limiting Bakugo's use of his gauntlets, it would be enough to keep the exercise constructive. Can anyone tell me why my thought process was flawed? There was more silence as he saw the students still being too shy to point out his mistakes. Luckily, Todoroki seemed to finally speak up from his place in the back of the room. You didn't factor in the possibility that Bakugo would ignore your instruction. And you allowed a split-second decision to contradict the rules you told up in the beginning. So, Midoriya and I weren't able to prepare for the event of Bakugo breaking free. Exactly. And in many ways, that makes me more at fault than Bakugo and Todoroki. And I apologize. You are all children still. I must have let the costumes trick me into thinking you were capable of handling such a stressful situation. You have a lot to learn before you can be heroes, just as I have a lot to learn about being a good teacher. Toshinori finished his speech and let the silence linger before he turned to the boxes once more. All right, time for the next group. Thankfully, the rest of the groups went by without a hitch. The most memorable in All Might's opinion was the battle between Shoji Mizo and Shiro Hanta as villains vs Ajiro Mashirao and Hagakure Toru as heroes. It was interesting to see two quirks best used for stealth go head to head. Not to mention, Shiro and Ajiro were almost evenly matched when it came to attacking. In the end, Hagakure and Ajiro won by turning the entire thing into a hide-and-seek match. Hagakure basically hazed the two pseudo-villains while Ajiro snuck behind and tagged the missile. Their laughter and camaraderie were what All Might had been aiming for when he had planned the exercise. And nobody else needed to go to Recovery Girl. It was sad that Toshinori needed to even point that out. _____. When he was finally done with the students and had sent them home, he shamefully walked himself to Nezu's office. It was his own fault, of course. The bear creature was looking over some files when Toshinori walked in. Ah, All Might. I thought I would be seeing you soon. He greeted with a smile. Have a seat. I presume you wish to talk about Bakugo Katsuki. All Might nodded as he took the offered seat. I just finished with my students and sent them home. How did the conversation with Bakugo go? Nezu shrugged as he pushed the files to the side. It went remarkably quick. Bakugo was mostly quiet during the entire thing, though he seemed very angry. When I was finally able to get the story out of him, I was shocked, to say the least. I couldn't understand why Bakugo would attack another student like that. But then I pulled out their files. All Might stayed quiet as he saw Nezu point to the files he had pushed aside. Were you aware that Midoriya and Bakugo attended the same junior high? Or that Midoriya was listed as quirkless until he registered for UA? Nervousness grew in All Might. I admit I knew about Midoriya. You see, I had met him over the summer when confronting a villain. He asked me if he could still be a hero without a quirk. I signed his notebook. The events were true, but the order wasn't. But what was All Might to say? He had caused the boy to commit suicide. All Might would never forget the sight for as long as he had left to live. He had seen the boy only a moment before on the roof. He looked upset, no. He looked crushed. And he had done that to him. He should have stayed back. Comforted the boy. Or better yet, kept his mouth shut and not even said those cruel words in the first place. Nezu seemed to read the look in his eyes but didn't press further. Something doesn't add up in these documents. They're both very smart with the top grades in their class, but on student evaluations, only Bakugo received glowing praise from all his teachers. Midoriya only received satisfactory results. All Might's brow furrowed. Midoriya is a pretty skittish child. Perhaps he blended into the background to avoid being targeted for his quirklessness. But All Might quickly realized that made no sense. He had seen Izuku's desperateness to be a hero. And Midoriya might have been quirkless, but that didn't explain why he would commit suicide. Sure, All Might was important to the boy, but surely he couldn't have been the only reason. I'll consult with Aizawa about it. He and I are planning to go see young Midoriya when he wakes up. I shall let you know if anything interesting comes up. It was a clear dismissal as Nezu pulled over the files once more and started to look over them once more. Toshi stood and walked out, planning on doing some thinking about the students he now found under his tutelage. _____. The next day, Izuku found it harder than usual to get out of bed. Despite the hours upon hours he had received the day before, he was still pretty exhausted. However, he refused his mother's offer to stay home that day. It was only his second week at UA. There was no way he was going to stay home. Besides, if the pattern continued, it would just be normal classes all day instead of anything too physically demanding. This in mind, Izuku crawled out of bed and took a shower. It was a bit awkward seeing as how the hot water was too much for the wound on his shoulder. So he ended up hanging his arm under a colder spray of water, letting it drip down and ease the stinging he already felt in it. That done, he carefully washed the rest of his body and hair. The rest of his morning routine was the same besides him having to make adjustments for his shoulder. But once a new bandage was applied, everything went smoother. He ate breakfast with his mother while trying to assure her that he was just fine. Even Nana seemed on edge. But both of them knew better than to try to convince him to stay home after he had already decided to go to class. The walk to UA was normal as well as he let his backpack hang on his good shoulder instead. The second you look like you're going to keel over, I'm alerting Aizawa. Nana threatened seriously. I'll be fine. I promise. He received only grumbles in answer. Most of the walk was in silence as Izuku thought about Bakugo. He didn't want the boy expelled. That wouldn't be fair. Bakugo was just as inexperienced as the rest of them when using their quirks. He was blinded by anger. Izuku had even provoked him when mentioning the bridge. He couldn't explain why he did it. He was just searching for any explanation as to why Kaken was so angry with him. What went wrong? They used to be so close. And now they were rivals. But why? Izuku was quirkless most of his life. And for all Bakugo knew, he had a standard quirk. Nothing flashy. So why did Bakugo feel so threatened? Why was Bakugo so determined to win? Midoriya. Izuku heard his name being called from behind and he turned to see Itza Power walking up to him. Ah, I thought that was you. It's good to see you on your feet. Izuku gave the taller boy a smile as he paused walking so he could catch up. It's good to be on my feet. I can't believe I slept so long. He was left surprised as Itza's pace slowed. About that, Midoriya. I want to apologize for you getting hurt. I should have had controlled Bakugo instead of letting him go on a rampadash. Wait, no. Izuku interrupted, waving his hands quickly. That's not what happened at all, Itza. You couldn't control Bakugo even if you wanted to. The best you could have done was follow him, but then the missile would have been exposed. You couldn't have known what would happen. Still. I can't help but feel responsible somehow, Itza sighed as he pushed his glasses up onto his nose. So please tell me if there is any way I can make it up to you. Izuku was stunned. He hadn't even realized that they had both stopped walking. It's because he cares, sweetie. You may say he's not at fault, but his own conscience still holds him accountable. Nana explained as her warmth leaned on his good shoulder. It gave Izuku an idea. Itza was obviously a very prideful person. He held himself to high standards and as such, he held his classmates to those same standards. There was no way he was going to let it go until he somehow repaid whatever debt he felt he owed. Itza. There actually is something you can help me with, if you want. Itza immediately perked up, almost like a puppy receiving a treat. Of course. I will try with my utmost ability to assist you. Just say the word. Izuku paused before sliding his backpack off his good shoulder. So, my shoulder still stings, so it's not a good idea for me to use both straps on my bag. but it puts a lot of weight on a single shoulder. It was a lame excuse. Izuku had no issue carrying his own bag. Do you think you can carry my bag for me? At least until we get to class. Obviously Itza expected more based on the confused look he gave Izuku. Even so, he stood straight and nodded. Of course. It would be my pleasure to carry your bag for you to class. Izuku handed his bag over and watched as Itza carried it easily. Thanks. I really do appreciate it. They shared a smile as they continued walking again. It was Itza who started the conversation once more. I had no idea you were still injured, Midoriya. Are you sure it's a good idea for you to be at school? See. If Izuku could roll his eyes mentally, he would. But instead, he smiled. I'm really okay. It stings, but nothing too bad. And we shouldn't have anything intense planned. So I figured I'm okay with coming to class. It was a nice change to have more people care about him. People who had no obligation like Nana or his mother. He had friends now, it seemed. More than one. Still, Shinsu would always be his first. If you're sure. MHM. _____. The pair spent most of the walk with amicable silence, both in their own thoughts. It was only when they approached the school that they stopped. There was a horde of what appeared to be reporters outside the gates, blocking the entrance. They want to interview everyone they can about All Might, Nana told Izuku, which made him frown slightly. Relaying the information to Itza, Izuku tried to figure out how to get through them. The obvious choice would be to go through, but then they risked being corralled into an interview. It seemed he took too long to think as the closest reporters caught sight of their UA uniforms. All it took was one look and they were suddenly surrounded. Tell us, what's the symbol of peace like in person? How is All Might faring as a teacher? What are you learning? What's his teaching style like? Has he given any information about his quirk and how it works? What can you say about the rumors that All Might is Dash? Izuku was quickly overwhelmed with all the questions as reporters swarmed around him. No comment. He tried only for them to press more. Is it true all students had to sign an NDA before enrolling? Has he started training yet? If so, how difficult are his methods? I don't know Dash. His leadership and wisdom remind me on a daily basis that I attend the world's most prestigious educational institution. Itza spat out. And as he spoke it seemed like all reporters zeroed in on his, leaving Izuku free to duck and dodge towards the gate. But still, Izuku didn't want to leave Itza to their prying. Of course, he's the personification of honor and integrity that one would expect. But he's also not afraid to show his students a more humorous side. Izuku froze suddenly as a hand touched his back. Turning quickly, he was relieved to see Izawa there. The man was silent as he held a finger to his lips, motioning Izuku to follow him. He didn't want to, but Izuku wasn't going to disobey. As soon as he was free from the horde, Izawa turned to him once more. Are you all right? He asked, looking him over. How's your shoulder? I'm okay, sir. But Itza is still Dash. He looks like he can handle them just fine. Izawa smirked and Izuku turned to see the entire crowd staring blankly as Itza lectured on about glory and poise. It was honestly pretty comical. But I suppose I should get him before he wastes the entire class out here, unless... Now Izuku was confused. Unless what, Mr. Izawa? Was he actually planning on leaving Itza outside? Can Nana destroy their cameras? Of course I can. Izuku felt her warmth leave him, and before he could even respond to the questions there were shouts as cameras started to spark and sputter one by one. The horde parted as the reporters ran from the shorted cameras only to have their own malfunction. If you looked closer you could even see the microphones doing the same. Izuku felt the rush of energy that came with the power sapping like a warm hum under his skin. Itza's head turned around in surprise until he saw Izawa and Izuku by the gate. Rushing over he spoke, I expected you to already be inside, Midoriya. I was worried you were caught in sparks. Both of you head inside. I'll handle this out here. Aizawa ordered as the reporters caught eye of the trio. Go. They both nodded before bolting through the gate. As they passed the threshold, the entrance was blocked by thickly armored panels. The panels were so thick that Izuku could barely make out Aizawa threatening the reporters with lawsuits for forcing interviews on minors without a guardian present. Well, UA is the best. Of course, what kind of institution would it be if it couldn't protect its students from reporters? But the EMP that destroyed their cameras was a nice touch. Aiza praised as he followed Izuku up to the front door of the building. Yeah, Izuku nervously went along with the idea of an EMP than to even try to explain to Aiza that he was the cause. There would be time later, hopefully. Also, I wanted to explain the class setup. So instead of going by the canon, I decided to do it a different way. UA has a standard 6-day-a-week curriculum. However, Sunday is a half/shortened day. Not only that, but that's when they have a practical lesson like the quirk assessment and the battle training. This helps with Izuku's injury continuity and gives me time to put in more events between major events. Although, doing it this way may technically make the school year longer than normal, but please ignore that. Although I doubt people would be counting the weeks in fanfiction to make sure it lines up with IRL school year times. Discord link. http URL.
Well, here I mean, please like, favorite, share, subscribe, and goodbye. Oh my god.